Today on Crude Awakenings, Alan and Cody sit down with Joel Alberts, a 45-year exploration geologist who has chased oil, gas, helium, rare earths, and big ideas across the energy business. In today's episode, they cover helium, horizontal drilling, early industry tech, data preservation, unconventional plays, and why geology is still one of the great treasure hunts. This episode is brought to you by the Oil and Gas Asset Clearinghouse. It's time for Crude Awakenings.
Hey folks, I'm welcoming you here to another edition of A Crude Awakening. And it gives me great pleasure today to welcome Joel Alberts, an old friend of mine and someone I met as the CEO of Drilling Info, and who was really instrumental in a lot of things that we developed, especially in Oklahoma and elsewhere. He was always the guy that I made sure that I met with and would tell him, give him a sneak peek behind the scenes of the things we were working on to get his opinion and to get his critique. And he was always, the most valuable things you can ever get in life is a good, honest critique. And when you find people that are willing to do that, you really treasure them and cherish them. And that's just been my experience with Joel. And the more that I've gotten to know him over the years, the more just impressed I am, as a geoscientist and as someone who, people claim sometimes that I think out of the box. Joel's never seen a box. He has always been thinking about things in ways that other people do not. And I think it's just, I'm really glad to be able to sit there and talk to you, Joel.
I appreciate that, Alan. It's been a very fun and educational relationship. I think we've crossed paths in many, many different trails and could always trust the other one's opinion if there was a problem to be solved. And so I appreciate getting to know you back in the DOS days.
That's right. Back in the DOS days. So tell me a little bit, how did you end up in this industry? Where were you born? What got you interested in this thing?
Okay. I was born up in Wichita, Kansas, and was around some very creative, innovative people. All my family ran ranches. They loved raising cattle, and we also had some wheat farmers up in Iowa too. We had a Century farm up there that I had to sell a couple years back. None of the next generations cared to farm anymore, but my timing was perfect because ethanol had just become hot on the market, and we had one of the best corn farms in Iowa. And I spent some time up there in the summers working, and I knew that wasn't something I really wanted to do, riding a tractor and plowing the rest of my life. Some mentors in Wichita encouraged me to, first I started into forestry, but we have a summer home in Colorado that we just love, and I enjoyed the forest. But back in those days, to get into forestry, you really, to get a good job with the government, you had to have some government connections. You needed to know the governor and the mayor. And another mentor encouraged me to look at rocks and study geology. So I followed that path, and he kind of led me and guided me into getting better at map making. That was back in the rapidograph days, and looking at old data and trying to put a new technical spin on it, incorporating any technology you could into the early days of drilling, and also consider all the products that you recover. Yeah. one of the first people I worked for was one of the first helium producers on planet Earth. And that's a whole nother story, but
it's an important an important part, especially with the Strait of Hormuz closed up. I hadn't realized that so much of the percentage of the 3.5 BCF a day or whatever that's the world production of helium came from that neck of the woods.
yeah. Well, and I actually have an article from a newspaper. Here is the first American, I don't know if you can see that or not, but he had 10 drilling rigs, drilled straight up. I was his lone geologist. So I was a drill stem tester and a well site geologist, and he loved helium. He had been in the Korean War and saw blimps becoming deployed, and the technology of a blimp then was like the technology of a drone today. But helium was the thing that allowed blimps to go float above other camps and other countries and do, some spying. So
that's interesting.
He came back over.
Quick question. How do you DST a helium well? Do you breathe and talk like Daffy Duck and that?
Your voice goes real high. We had a lab. I would run the DSTs and catch gas samples, and we'd send them to a lab where they would freeze and freeze and freeze. And at minus 456 Fahrenheit, the last thing left in gaseous state is helium. And so they'd tell us what percentage of our gas. And, 5 or 6% is a very high percentage usually.
Very high.
So what was the geology you used there? I mean, what were you mostly following then? Was it well control and seeing it in logs, or how were you, if you're just starting that out, how did you pioneer that from a initial geology standpoint?
Well, he was kind of the mentor. He'd been in the business quite a while and had earned enough he didn't like partners, so he did everything straight up. He had earned enough. He had built a cryogenic plant and got bought out in the middle of Kansas. But the thing he really encouraged me to do was the helium is very small and naturally can go through any rock as it goes up to the soil and out into the atmosphere. The thing that we knew would capture and trap the helium was salt. So most people were very disappointed having to drill through the salt to get into the pay zones with natural gas and oil. He was real excited about the salt. If you could find it where it wasn't fractured, no faulting, a natural dome as your trap over your Cretaceous age and older rocks, and those reservoirs would have the gas in them that would contain a higher percentage of helium.
I'll be darned. So the that curse of Kansas geology, certainly for the seismic guys, the salt was the magic ingredient, huh?
Right.
So what is it about the halite structure or the anhydride structure? What is about that? I know that salt is known for its annealing properties really well. You bust it up and it anneals quickly. But what is it about the structure that traps helium?
It's the density, the lack of perm. He always called it the duct tape. You've got the porous rock that helium is up into, and then you put the duct tape the salt over it.
I'll be darned. How
And
interesting.
it doesn't stop it, it just slows it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back then, what type of, you were drilling for these wells, what type of rates were you looking for? Like what was the target rate you would hope for and get? And then what was the price? I mean, what did the economics of that look like when you started with this group?
Well, the price of gas was terrible. And we were getting penalized. What initially started this, where he built a cryogenic plant to process helium, was the fact that, and it was the first one in the United States, Department of Energy threw up a red flag and came down and talked to him, wondering what he was doing. And he said, well, I'm getting penalized for this bad gas, this component in my natural gas. I'm getting docked for hydrogen, I'm getting docked for helium, and I'm getting docked for some other things, CO2. And he goes, but I know helium has value, and if I can't sell it here in the U.S., I've got some people in Germany I'm gonna call, and I know they'll buy it. Well, the next day, every major pipeline in the U.S. was told to call, and one of them bought him out. And there was a major pipeline running right through that area. But we had many townships in several counties that had young surface structures right underneath the salt. It was very innovative. He also, to survive and keep 10 rigs running, he liked older Arbuckle age oil, the heavier oil. He was not a big proponent of 40 gravity oil. He liked the 25 gravity oil because within that you can extract things like rubber and some of the byproducts that sold for more than the oil did. But he's
Kind of
very
ahead of his
innovative.
time, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Very
he
much
was.
ahead of his time, wasn't he?
Yes,
How fortunate to be able to have a first mentor like that.
yes, it was.
You know, it was interesting. My first job out of college was with these two guys out in Houston. They were called Range Oil and Gas. It was Stan Pindus and Clinton Luth, the two old wildcatters, and their claim to fame was that they were good friends with the O'Connor family out of the two brothers in Victoria, and they were the only guys who could ever get a lease from the O'Connors, because the O'Connors had their own private oil company. They drilled all their own land, never would lease it out, but they would give Stan and Clint leases on prospects that they found on O'Connor land. And so they could immediately go sell those prospects to the Cockerells and the Moncriefs and whatever, because it was the only time anybody ever got to see anything underneath the O'Connor land, and they were pretty successful at it. But I was working with them and mapping this area in East Texas, as a young know-nothing geologist, and I mapped this big structure. I think it might have even been a smackover structure, and I was excited about it because I thought that I had found this great, prospect. That was before I realized that usually when I was mapping something, I was the 10,000th person to map something. And if I found a huge structure, it was unlikely that I was the only one that ever saw it. And there was a well on top of it that was a dry hole. And then when they looked at the well bore, it had tested nitrogen. And so they had plugged in a band in it. And my bosses looked at that and said, yeah, it's interesting. And then they went and made a deal with Big Three Industries. I think they did gas extraction. And they re-entered that old well. And Big Three made a deal where they could keep all the natural gas. The Clinton Stan could keep all the natural gas, but they got all the nitrogen and all the other things. They just put a big cryogenic unit on there. And I think Stan and Clinton said that prospect paid out in 2.5 hours. best economics they had ever had in their life. And it was just because that was, Stan was the first guy that ever taught me to look at things not in he said, everybody looks at things on a very linear basis. This, and that. And if you follow those, you're not going to ever see the opportunities. He goes, you got to look at everything and start looking at it from different directions. And that whole deal was them asking themselves the question, is there a market for nitrogen that clearly no one else had ever asked? And sure enough, there is a market for nitrogen. They were able to make a deal very quickly to go do that and go out there and put together the best economic play that they ever had. And and the only thing that pisses me off is I never got any override on that thing. But I did get the experience, and I was, to me, I cherish the opportunity to have worked with guys like that. So it's mentorship is such an important part of this business, and who you work for, and people that do think out of the box.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Joel, after that, your first experience, what happened next? I mean, kind of how did your career kind of unfold as you after your mentor, you moved on from there? I'm sure. What can you give us? I know a lot of the rest of the story, but if you could tell us, that'd be great.
Actually, from there it was that was early '80s. In about '86, we had $7 oil in some really ugly times, and I had just gone out on my own. My boss that I was telling you about, Mr. Engel, he decided one day, I'm done. And his goal was to drill 100 wells a year straight out. We never quite made it. We got in the low 90s, but we had 7 people in the office was all, and not much of a staff, lean and mean. He, with some spare capital, one day he went down and bought the bank that owned the building that we were in, so he didn't have to pay rent anymore. I think it was a 19-story building. It was a beautiful building right downtown Wichita. But he was tired of paying rent, so he just went and bought the building. I went out on my own with his encouragement, and the oil price collapse hit, and I had 3 young boys, and I didn't have college funds, and was pretty concerned about that. And a friend of mine that I'd gone through college with at KU, he called me and said, "Hey, I've taken a job down in Oklahoma, a little startup, and they have a new technology that they're breaking out." And I told him, of all people that could go down into the field to the rigs and help talk to the field hands and the rig hands. And I'd worked on too many rigs, roughnecking and drill stem testing and everything else. But I got a call from this guy down in Oklahoma City, and he encouraged me to come down and interview. And after some time, I accepted it. It was a little startup called Chesapeake. So I was there in the early days of the Austin Chalk, and here they were putting a new technology into an old industry called horizontal drilling. And I got to go out on the wells and talk to the guys in the field. And back in the day, it was Anadrill. They got bought by Schlumberger. But spent a lot of time with a fax machine in the back of my car, and every survey that they took on a horizontal, I'd have it screaming up in the back of my car, and I'd have to pull over and stop and read it real quick and find out if we were in zone or out of zone or too far this way or that. So it was fun. And one thing I'm really trying in mentoring today to encourage is putting some new technologies into these plays, new ideas. And one that always is important is, what can we do to make this more economic, cost less? Can we be more efficient? But another one is, what resources can we engage, and extract lithium out of our brine water and have another product to sell. So it's always fun being out with some of these innovators. I went from Chesapeake over to another public company that was just really taking off. The son had stepped in, taken over for his dad, and it was called, we were on one floor in a little building. It was called Devon. And I actually got to spend an hour last week with Larry Nichols, and just had a nice time catching up, because he appreciated my horizontal experience, helped when we bought a few companies and went into some old areas like, Louisiana, and also the Barnett Shale.
What was your role with them when you went on to Devon? What was kind of your role title from Chesapeake to Devon? What position did you have?
Senior explorationist.
Those were kind of golden times, because I remember Robert Hefner III was working over at Chesapeake, and that it was back when he was in that one or two buildings over there before it exploded out.
I
had a friend of mine. Yeah,
that's right.
They were renting. They rented those buildings and
office 2 doors down from Robert.
I remember visiting over there during those days, and I had a friend of mine who had kind of had the misfortune of owning a 3% working interest in those Austin chalk play, in that Austin chalk play down there, and all I know is that
that's great. That's vintage beautiful. There.
He was. It didn't take very much time before he was scrambling to figure out how to come up with like the $300,000 a month that he needed, or the $1 million a month that he needed to pay his 3% override, 3% working interest on those things. He thought, oh, this is going to be great. Easily contained, and you talk about spraying the carburetor. Chesapeake invented that whole that whole methodology. Wow.
And Mr. McClendon was very innovative, always thinking out of the box. When we went from, he gave me one of the original Chesapeake jackets with Chesapeake Bay logo on it, the early days. But when we went into Louisiana and went deeper in what we used to call the Bossier, now they call it the Haynesville. But we went from oil that we'd been finding in the Austin Chalk in Texas to natural gas. And the deeper we went, the higher percentage gas and the less oil. So that's when the logo changed to a blue flame, a flare. Chesapeake became a gas company. So technology transformed his business mindset, and he really was very bullish on natural gas for our future energy needs. He was thinking way ahead.
Yeah, was that the intention when you were out there drilling out those Bossier wells, or were you really initially seeking oil more like the Austin Chalk and just ran into gas? I mean, was that really the idea originally, or did it just change when you obviously got your results?
I think it was more of a change from the results.
That's interesting.
Well, he really was ahead of his time in terms of thinking about the product mix, and he really was a believer in natural gas as essentially a fundamental energy source.
Yeah.
Hats off to him.
Yeah, I think that's I never had heard that. I've heard a lot of stories, and I've talked to you, Joel, about some of this stuff a little bit over years ago. But I never understood it to be an accidental gas. A really unintentional but opportunistic gas switch to a natural gas company. That's pretty wild. Was there a shift in price that time on natural gas, or was it relatively a flat market that you just had the gas and said, hey, this is what we can exploit?
Boy, Alan, do you remember it never went much below $1, but it never went over $2.
Okay.
It stayed very flat.
It was a sucky envelope.
Right.
Although looks pretty good today in terms of real value,
That's true.
What was it about those each groups? If you could tell us, I mean, you've done a little bit on Chesapeake, but on Devon, what made them successful? I mean, what made them different? Obviously, they're one of the top, still, however you look at it, one of the top companies of the last 30 years in the industry, both of them. I mean, what made them special?
John Nichols was that more traditional oil man and had very reliable partners. He kept bankers and CPAs involved, so they stayed within the bounds of the finances and AFEs and everything. His son Larry, who took Devon out and into a public company, real visionary. He looked at some of the older oil companies that weren't doing much. The first acquisition that I got to experience, I'd been there about 6 months, and they bought Pennzoil.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And Pennzoil had all this acreage and no rigs running on it, nothing going on. And as we dug in deeper, we found out that they really hadn't updated, some of their processing systems, and they had some things that just the investment would stimulate. And not to mention a lot of acreage we liked, some production that we felt could be reworked. So the Pennzoil acquisition, he bought it for certain properties, things that we didn't like, we quickly spun off and sold. But I was there for, I think, 5. We bought Santa Fe Snyder, which was just a bad marriage. Do you remember them, Alan? Santa Fe and Snyder?
I do. It was a bad marriage from the beginning. Snyder alone was a great company. Santa Fe was kind of floundering a little bit, but together, it killed that spark that Snyder actually had.
Well, Mr. Nichols sent me down to their office in Houston, and right off the bat, around the table, there were people arguing, and we hadn't even really gotten to a discussion point yet. It was just a bad marriage. He said, this is the perfect thing to buy, is a bad marriage. I can get it for a good price. Let's find out what the pluses are and find out what the minuses are. Get rid of the things we don't want and keep the things we do. We bought Anderson up in Canada. And then the George Mitchell acquisition I was heavily involved with, and spent about a year in the woodlands studying, the history of what they'd done and what, how, and why. Because we felt there might be a little more potential in some of their assets. One of them turned out to be the Barnett Shale.
Yeah, that was, what a great opportunity. I mean, what a great career opportunity to be able to be there at ground zero at the whole beginning of the unconventional plays and really studying what the groundbreakers were doing.
Yeah. Every time I see Mr. Nichols, he always has to tease me. He said, you were wrong. You were wrong. What? I said, well, you wanted to drill those first 5 horizontals a different way than had been done. And 4 of the 5 did work real well. But you told me the upside could be 4 counties. It was 7.
Well, that's a great.
And I told him I try to round down once in a while.
What is the most exciting thing you've ever worked on?
The shale revolution has been a lot of fun, extracting natural gas and products that we can use out of a source rock. I've worked in coal bed methane plays, and that's similar in excitement to extract real high quality methane out of a coal bed layer at a very shallow depth is, to me, is very stimulating. And
That's interesting because coal gases, don't you have to kind of produce it for a while before it starts to produce, and then it actually has kind of an incline rather than a decline?
yes,
It's kind of a unicorn for oil and gas guys.
yes. And Alan, usually the coal is a relatively young, shallow event as well, so the costs are not as much as a deep horizon.
Yeah, that was that. I was always very fascinated by that. I was fascinated that the people that really got coal bed methane did really well in it, and but there was a lot of people that got in there that was looking for net. They were looking for net to gross ratios, and I remember Marathon traded out all their East Texas for the Wyoming coal bed, and all the coal beds they had a lot of net coal, but they were all in like 2-foot seams, and they could never make that work.
Yeah, and that turned into a P&A nightmare in Wyoming. Kind of started a whole, all the conventional operators suffered from that one. But because there were so many peat wells that need to be P&A that were orphaned, but yeah, I guess there's just like anything else. There's good coal bed methane plays and bad ones, right? Just like any other oil and gas play.
Sure. You can have very high sulfur content that is a contaminant.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, so continue.
Really just applying innovation and some new technologies, and then also looking at the products that can be extracted. I think today, Alan, at NAPE this year, we had a Cherokee Shale prospect we were showing, but I also, on the backboard for our booth, I put rare earth elements because we do have potential lithium and helium in this area. And it brought a very interesting crowd. A lot of people were curious, wanting to learn more about rare earth elements.
Well, I think that's so powerful, and I'm glad to hear that because that's something that is, kind of out of sight, out of mind for most oil and gas geoscientists or engineers, and I think you're right. You've always kind of touted the alternative streams of minerals that you could actually go out there and capture. I remember long before it became popular to talk about lithium, you were looking at lithium in waters or produced waters or what have you, and rare earth elements, and you were way ahead of I think the industry with regards to really trying to isolate where those might be. And what was it about those that caught your attention?
Just a lot of times diving into the data and looking for something unique. I'm trying to preserve a lot of our old data here. And an example, I think a real good example, we have some old handwritten strip logs that at 2,000 feet, when they were drilling in the 40s, looking for one product called oil, but they would have a blowout at 2,000 feet from natural gas and have to vent for a week before they could get enough water and mud in the hole to go down an additional 2,000 and get down to 4,000 feet to that target zone. They had blinders on. They wanted that oil at 4,000 feet. And what they encountered was a significant gas accumulation above. But at the time, in the 40s, that wasn't important at all. So now we have a field that I found the data on where they have drilled the old 40s wells are slowly declining, being abandoned, being plugged, and nobody's even thought about what's up above.
Huh.
And if we throw that old handwritten script log away, there's nothing you can Google all day long, and you can't find that day-by-day estimate of the gas that's blowing out of this well. It was bad news at the time, and they just really didn't want to keep it in the well file.
I'll be darned. You know, that's interesting, because when we did when we digitized all the production records back to the 30s in Texas, for the first time that anybody had ever done that, one of the things that really struck me was how many wells were essentially, they had old gas wells that were plugged and abandoned, making 3, 4, 5 million a day. And they plugged and abandoned those wells in the early 40s, in 1942, 1943, because you couldn't get tubulars. You couldn't get tubulars during the war or even afterwards. And so there was this huge effort they were plugging gas wells everywhere they could so that they could extract the tubulars, so that they could use those tubulars in oil wells, which was part of the war effort to get get oil over to Europe. And
Sure.
And plugging those wells, oftentimes never to be re-entered. And they were shallow, as you pointed out, shallow, oftentimes in the freshwater zones, so that you never really, even if you logged it, you probably didn't recognize it because it looked like freshwater.
Right.
Yeah, those kind of disruptions create real opportunities for people that actually have access, that can actually look at that data, or that you don't throw that data away. And it's really, that whole effort to try to take paper data and turn it into digital data so that it can be queried easily was a passion of mine, is a passion of mine. But, just getting paper, those old strip logs were works of art, beautiful.
And the daily reports they used to do, because they were drilling slow with cable tool rigs, and they would have day by day, line by line detail. Later, well, in the early days of DOS and Microsoft, Alan, there was only one thing you would put on day number 7. You'd put the footage. That was it. You wouldn't talk about how much gas got vented overnight, the potential fire, and all the details that went around getting to that depth.
Wow.
So the old onion skin typed daily papers, I've been trying to archive those and preserve them, and we found 2 coal bed fields because of that, where people drilled down through CBM and had, significant sulfur odor and wanted to get through it as quick as they could. But just that little detail that can get left out can be pretty significant later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we met, I think, Joel, in Oklahoma City. I went to Oklahoma City and went to I think it's the Geologic Society. You were, I'm sure you still are, a big part of that, and that was really your initiative with that group. and if you could explain, what you guys do. But you've been working diligently for a long time to preserve this data for not just for yourself, but for the industry. And I think it's a great accomplishment that I'd love for people to hear about that haven't heard about it. I got to see it in person and understand what it's been years ago. But if you could talk about that a little bit in general.
We have had a very fancy geologic library downtown Oklahoma City. And just before COVID, with things becoming more and more digital and we had fewer people even using the library anymore. But we had a phenomenal location downtown Oklahoma City, prime real estate. Marriott, I think it was Marriott, was going to come in and take part of our parking lot and build a big facility, and things were really booming down there. And a friend of mine was in real estate, and I went to him and said, where could we take all this old paper stuff and store it for a less expensive price? And he goes, well, I have an old car, an auto garage that we keep collector cars in, and we can move them all out, and you can put all your paper files in there. So we've moved up north, sold that building. The geologic library doesn't really need to own real estate. We did the best that year per square foot that anybody had done, because everybody wanted to buy our building with Marriott coming in. We've moved up to a lot more of a warehouse. We don't have anything fancy, just we have some really good scanners, some really good copiers. Some of the companies here in town have donated computer systems that they thought were getting old, but they're very adequate for somebody using the library. We have a couple different mapping programs and access to the digital data, and we're putting our library online. Mid-Continent, we renamed it from Oklahoma Geological Library, to the Mid-Continent Library. We've acquired part of Tulsa's data. Amarillo sent data. North Texas has sent data. So we're actually becoming more of a Mid-Continent library. And Alan, you know how frequently data sources can stop right at a country line or a state line or a county line, but the geology goes right on across. So we're moving down, a township or two into this county or that county and adjoining areas, adjoining states, and we're trying to preserve all that data, and we're scanning it to keep it, accessible.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think what a laudable effort, and I wish more of the libraries would look at what you guys have done and follow example.
It's been a lot of work, but we have some good volunteers. A lot of retired guys come down and will update the mud logs. They'll pull the old worn ones out that have been, in the drawer for 30 years and are decaying, and they'll replace them with a newer copy that we have, and help get things in order and in line. We had to index everything first before we started the scanning process, but got some folks that are doing a great job of getting all the scanning accomplished. So just preserving some of this old data, to me, has been real important.
Yeah. When is it going to be live, the library online? What's the target?
It's there now. It's there now.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know that. That's great. What?
Mid-Continent Geologic Library.
So, Joe, what's the most exciting thing? What excites you the most these days?
Well, in the last 10 days, it's been the price of oil, Alan.
Yeah, I it's fun to watch, but I just, unfortunately, I don't think I don't think producers are going to see much of that. It's mostly a day trader. It's a trader game, and things that go up 30% or 50% or double, and then back down to where they were. And it'll be interesting to see where the floor is. If it can move it up to $70, I think it's going to be a great long-term effect for producers. But it's just it's fun to watch on the one hand.
But to answer your question, Alan, and through someone you introduced me to, Mark Mills, I got to spend some time on a cruise in December with Steve Forbes. And their question was, where are we going to get our future energy with these AI systems, with data centers coming in, exponential need? What's going to fuel this? Where are we going to get our source? And to tell them that we still have in the mid-continent of the U.S., we still have relatively inexpensive land. There are potential prospects where an old oil field is starting to get plugged out, and nobody realizes there's a shallow gas field sitting right above it, like we talked about earlier. There is still potential where you can get close to a good source of fuel. The electric grid is going to get cleaned up and refurbished. We have more remote systems. I got involved for a little while with some ex-Schlumberger guys doing a Bitcoin mining process where we were going to flare gas and converting to electricity so they could Bitcoin mine. But just some new ideas in the old areas is one thing I'm more focused on right now.
I don't think very many people understand the excitement that you feel in your whole body the moment that you have that aha moment that there's a prospect there, or that you find that notation that says, wow, there was a lot of gas here that no one else is going, that you go out and you do the checking to make sure that it wasn't drilled later or what have you. And then that building anticipation of like, oh, wow, I've got a prospect.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Exactly.
Of course you know what I'm talking about. But I don't think very many people do know what that feeling is like. I mean, finding that buried treasure or that hint that there's a treasure there, it's nearly undescribable.
I compare it to casino. It's when you walk through, I don't go to casinos, I walk through them. And because my gambling is with the drill bit.
Much higher stakes.
Right. But when I hear the thrill, hey, I just won. Look what my dice did. Or I pulled the slot machine and look. It's a very similar experience. You just don't have the crowd around you. Usually it's
more of a solitary thing.
Right.
Yeah, but it is, as geology in a whole is treasure hunting. That's not really talked about. Like treasure hunters are always famed, but geologists have found far more value on this planet. I mean, more than you could ever calculate, more value than any treasure hunter. But it really is. I mean, you're always hunting treasure, and that's a fun thing about geology. My question is, as much as you guys are geology, gurus, you guys have been at the top of the ladder in this business, and we wouldn't be here today in oil and gas without geologists. But as you know, today, the world landscape's different. I mean, it's an engineer-driven, finance, land-driven now industry, domestic. I mean, where do you see really where geology's going? I mean, where the next batch of geologists, where is that going? Where's that job? What does that mean going forward, in your opinion?
Well, I think diving deeper into some of the old data, I also had really was the honor of working with a guy named Dan Jarvie, one of the top geochemists at the time in the world. And we went all over planet Earth looking in some of the big basins to look for future source rock opportunities, shales.
Yeah.
But I was shocked at the amount of data that is being stored away and not reviewed, not re-examined with, 40 years later with a younger set of eyes. I went through in the Delaware Basin hundreds of well logs and rock samples, and did the geochemical analysis on dozens of those. And we ended up putting together just shy of 1 million acres down in the Delaware back in 2003. A crazy idea, but it was Texas. I could deal with the people. The Polish Geological Survey flew over and we met them. They came over to see us. But I didn't like their environment for, keeping an override or royalty. Vaca Muerta was very intriguing, but I was a little worried about where the country was going in Argentina. Looked at a lot of very significant places, basins that had good source rocks and future unconventional development potential. And at my age, I decided, here's an area nobody's paying any attention to in Texas. And I went down and did some of the leasing myself and would knock on doors and people would say, we haven't leased this land in 20 years. Are you kidding me? I'd say, well, yeah, I'm out ahead of stupid. I'm either gonna be numb or dumb. So we were able to put together a huge block in a year and a half. One-on-one, get down, get out there and do it the hard way. That's another thing I'm pushing is, there's times where you just have to get out and to get some of the old data, you have to go hunting for it. It's not easily accessible.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking, because, geology seemed to, geology's always been the constant. I mean, and then there was this concept that all you really needed to have is geology to the basin scale, and then engineering would take the rest of it. That was kind of the unconventional deal. So it was all of a sudden, it was the idea of picking a location wasn't really that important. Geology seemed like it lost its importance. And then there was, in the 3D world, they had lost a lot of that cachet to the geophysicist. And then,
Right.
But what was interesting to me is that as a profession today, geology still, a good geologist with the experience that they have is still valuable. A geophysicist with a lot of experience isn't as valuable. And all of a sudden, what we saw was this inversion, this value inversion in geophysics was kids coming out of school with a bachelor's or a master's from Colorado School of Mines that really understood rock physics. And those became super valuable because no one that had graduated from with a geophysics degree, 10 years or 20 years earlier knew any of that stuff. It was that technology had kind of had got there and surpassed, very much like a software engineer, right? Someone who learned Fortran is, it's really endemic that you have to keep up with stuff. Now, the geology's not had that same it's not building technology. It's basically taking information and coming up with some concept of what's under the earth. And there are some technologies that you can do to make it easier to visualize or to view or what have you, but it hasn't depended on that. And being able to see various different things still matters. Having an experienced geologist, somebody that has 30 or 40 years of experience and knows local area things, that, here's an area that produces a lot of hypersaline fluid, and it'll load up a well and it'll look like it's declining. And, those kind of things still make the oil industry fairly interesting. And it keeps, and those are the bugaboos for, the investor guys that are, the big guys out of New York that have a fund to go out there and acquire a whole bunch of things that they never recognize any of those things because they've never actually done the field. They've never really understood the field side of it. And I've always thought that was kind of experience versus new technology. There was that inversion in geophysics, but never in geology. And the other thing that was interesting to me was, did you know, for instance, that there's roughly the same number of supergiant oil fields that are structural in nature and stratigraphic in nature. But then as you step down to slower and lower scale, that structural dominates. It was the structural conventional fields are like 80%, and then the unconventional, the stratigraphic were 20%. And that's not because the natural distribution, because the natural distribution is probably the same. It's just that we've never had the tools to de-risk looking for those. And that was why, there's a truism there that is, in the oil and gas industry, depends on there being luck. The idea that you drill a well, if you had to only produce the well that you were drilling from the formation and the trapping that you were looking for, you probably, the success rates would be 1/10 of what they are, because we stumble into things by drilling wells. And what's kind of interesting about the unconventional world is we've now pattern drilled all these areas, but we didn't really log them. And areas like North Dakota that are prolific with stratigraphic fields that nobody really knows how to explore for, have been drilled on the way down to go out there and go horizontal on a Bakken as fast as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's kind of a fascinating world that we live in.
I agree, Alan. On kind of a similar or a parallel note, when seismic was first getting invented, there's this thing called single point. Remember single point seismic?
Absolutely.
Okay. Then, because a lot of the farmers and ranchers didn't want that dynamite on their property and that hole in the ground, they came up with 2D, that they could go up the road in between the farm and the ranches. Then obviously we went to 3D. Well, a lot of single point was put on surface structures and places that people had mapped and knew there could be that structure with oil in it out here. Long story short, I came across several townships, if not counties, of single point seismic. And those are just beautiful leads. Now we can use 3D to enhance them, to reestablish there could be a structure here with 3D, but it's that old single point lead that initiates that.
Beautiful.
So,
well, one of the things that we were working on, I don't think we really took it to its final fruition, but it was when we were we had the Transform team, was that we had a couple of guys working on this system in which it kind of put inversion on its head. And the whole idea was to take well logs and build three-dimensional models of the subsurface with well logs, and start looking at what was the variability layer by layer, formation by formation, and be able to go out there and give numerical representation to those kind of things, so that you knew what was going to be, what was changing gradually versus what's changing very quickly, and that you could actually grade, kind of do kind of numerical stratigraphy, as it were, with regards to that. And you were doing it at the scale of a well log as opposed to the scale of seismic data. Because the problem with seismic data is you don't really have very good control on a depth basis, on a formational basis. So it's a limiting factor when you go back. And if you use that as your model basis, kind of use this interpolation basis of saying, here's statistically, I know that this is going to be here, and this is going to be this, it's going to look like this relative to these other things. And then here's the variability factor. That's a much better model to start with from the subsurface than seismic. And you can layer seismic onto that to make it work. But it's much more of a geological point of view than driven from seismic. And I thought that would be a really interesting project. And that was, that's really the one thing that I really regret leaving without finishing.
Well, it's not too late, Alan.
So, as a KU grad, were you? Did you know Bob Peebler when did you guys go to school together?
I know of him, but we weren't in. I think he was ahead of me in school.
Well, I tell you, it's KU boxes out of its weight class with regards to the talent of its geoscientists.
Well, one thing that was very fun while being up there was the fact that Fogg Allen, who's right down the street from the geology department, Allen Fieldhouse, was the innovator of basketball. The sport of basketball started right down the street. Mm-hmm. And we go read the stories of the tough times that they went through trying to get this game to keep kids active, keep young men healthy. Let's come up with this game and let's do it indoors, not outdoors. Put the polo pony away. We're going to do it indoors when it's snowing. And you'll still get to wear short sleeve shirt and shorts and some good running shoes. And the history of basketball is very well annotated right down the street from the geology department. So the innovative people are also very motivating.
Yeah. Are you a basketball fan?
I'm a fan. Yeah, I've been a Thunder ticket holder forever, and still watch KU basketball when I can.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've got season tickets to Thunder too, Joel. Maybe I should try to connect with you. I don't go to every game, but I go to a lot of them.
Oh, yeah, we need to talk about that. I backed off some of my seats, and so we're just kind of opening up to new ideas. I've been in the same seats forever, and moving around is kind of fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's great. Great. One thing I'd like to get, if we could, ideally the people listening to this are folks that are, the full gamut, thinking about coming into oil and gas, been in oil and gas, all the way to, guys that have been in it for 50 years. But we always like to ask everybody, with the point being, what can we learn from this, like for all of us, but also people, we always want to encourage, as you and I have spoken about before, encouraging people to get into this business and to believe in it. It's a marathon, not a sprint, through the ups and downs. But what advice would you give those folks, the folks who are new to it or just getting in it? What is the advice that you give them, about being in the industry, or anything that would help them along the way?
Patience. And on the business side, it's very important to have a plan. Debt planning is extremely important because the only thing you can do to buffer low oil price is not have big payments. So house payments, car payments, all that you need to be careful with. And the exciting thing is once you get into your first oil field or discovery, whether it's minerals or oil or gas or anything nowadays, then there's less worry about debt. I'm a big believer in minimizing debt the best that I can, and not having to worry about what do I do next in taking a job that I don't like or I don't want. I've been fortunate to have been with several private family companies. I was with the Huffman family for 14 years, and we explored all over the United States, and they didn't want to go outside of the U.S., which was fine. And I've been with 2 public companies, and they're both very good experiences. Learned a lot at both public companies, the goods, the right things to do. Also, things not to do. So really focusing on, but I like to take it back to what can I do today and get an idea that's just floating in the air onto a map, out of a dream and into a plan, and bounce it off respected, peers and coworkers, and push forward. There's nothing more exciting than that dream turns into reality. And that can be an acquisition or a rank wildcat discovery. They're all very, very exciting and rewarding.
And it's doable.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think that's an important thing. This is not pie in the sky. It's not something that's impossible for somebody who's, coming up and learning, how to do the business, that it's somehow, it's only open to rich people, or it's only open to, it's a business that is, pats you on the back when you try, and you got to be good for your word, but my experience has been it's been very accepting of everyone that wants to be in this business.
Collaboration with my goal is always to be the dumbest person in the room. If I can reach that goal, then I've succeeded for that day.
You guys are great minds think alike. Alan, right before we started this today and got on, he told me the same thing. We talked about I said it before, but today, he said it the same thing, the same exact way, Joel. So that must be great. Oh yeah. Yep. That's right. I still have mine too.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And those were opportunities to get together and collaborate, and you could share a dream or an idea, maybe not in detail, but immediately get some feedback from smart people and decide whether maybe you ought to drop the dream or forget the dream or trade it for something else. But
that was such a great experience, and the people that we did have in the room. Mark Mills paid a very high compliment to me on just when I saw him last, which was maybe a year ago. He said he gets invited to speak at 10,000 conferences, and he's gone to. He goes, that was the only conference that he actually ever stayed at and attended other deals because he got something out of sitting there listening to the people that were there, you know, in the kind of the open discussion forums that we had. And you know, from a guy like Mark, that was a huge accolade.
Another thing I was going to mention, it's a small world. And as a geologist, I'm saying that, and as just a citizen, I'm saying that. My wife and I went on this cruise and with the Forbes group, and Mark Mills was one of the speakers. And he brought his wife. And they got to visiting, and all of a sudden, she asked, you know, where are you all from? We said, Oklahoma City. And she go, oh, well, you may know my cousin. And she threw out his name, and my wife almost was in tears. She goes, we raised our kids together. I can't believe that's your cousin. Oh, yeah, we come up to have dinner with them once a year. And, well, we're all going out for dinner next time you're up here. So it was just one of those small world. And in the business, you run into that a lot. So the point of that, you have to be kind to everyone, because you never know what comes back around if you're not. And so it's an amazing. Mark had the biggest smile when his wife's telling my wife, well, when we come through next time, we're going to all get together for dinner. And he's just looking at me like, wow, I don't believe this is happening. And we were down in the, you know, Southern Caribbean somewhere, way off. We weren't anywhere close to Oklahoma. But it was just one of those small world deals.
Yeah, that's wild.
Sounds like an Oklahoma
deal.
Well, that's okay.
Done.
Boom.
That's great. Well, I know we had over a little bit over time. I'm sure you have things to do, Joel, but it's good. I haven't talked. I tried to find you in Nape. I should have gone to your booth. Scott said you're around the corner. I thought I saw you, but I was only there for just a minute. I should have found you. It's been 4 or 5 years since I've seen you, but it's good to catch up with you and really, it's your story's awesome. I mean, you're pretty unique, rare, experiences you've had, So we really appreciate you being on here, and hopefully, I'll go with this. This makes an impact on the industry in a positive way, and people get to learn about things they wouldn't otherwise know. But for me, I just enjoyed it because I never heard all that. So appreciate your time and story.
Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks for listening to Crude Awakenings. Big thanks to Joel Alberts for joining Alan and Cody to share stories from his years in exploration. If you enjoyed today's episode, give us a like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Crude Awakenings is produced by Rivery Marketing Group, a subsidiary of Rivery Capital.